Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hack Attack. We have returned. We've come back.
It's time.
I know this is besides the multi-part ones. This might be the fastest that we have returned.
We've ever come back for another hack attack.
That's
it's because
right.
we had an obvious thing we needed to talk about, and it was obviously painful.
Yeah, there was a moment of almost derailing that episode of West Marches, and then being like, no, we're gonna be good.
Hey, let's do this outside of the show.
We'll save this from ruining everybody's good time.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who have not attended such a thing before, this is Hack Attack, where sporadically my dear friend and co-GM Stephen Lumpkin and I sit down and work on modifying the tabletop role-playing games that we are currently playing to make them better for the things that we are doing. Because I think that, and I think I speak for both of us, we are adherents to the idea that one plays the game as it is written until one realizes one is no longer playing said game, and then one writes new things for games.
Like, I think that 5th edition D&D is really well done for a game that's like about a core cast of characters going through sort of an epic fantasy story, but that's not at all what the West Marches is about. And we're breaking it in a lot of very critical ways.
Yeah, and so far on the show, we've been primarily focused on a game that Steven is running over at It Made JP called The West Marches, which is a exploratory dungeons adventure type of game using Dungeons and Dragons. But as we sort of learned very early on in the Hack Attack, we don't like some of the things that D&D does versus the design goals that the game has. And I think that this is a very common problem for pretty much every GM ever in the history of time, right? Like you start playing a game and you're like, I will play this game because I like or know it, and all my friends like and or know it. And so you start playing this game, and then you get to a point where you're like, wait a second, this is not the game we're playing. It's happening to me on Mirror Shades. It's having to do with West Marches, and the only way to fix that is to change the rules of the game.
House rules some shit.
Yeah. And this is the thing, is like, I see a lot of eye rolling and scoffing at the idea of house rules. And I do a little bit of it too. Like, if I'm going to join, and this hasn't happened to me in a while, but I'm going to join a game, and someone is like, yeah, it's like, it's like 2nd edition D&D, but like I added a bunch of house rules. My inner gamer recoils into the darkness like a vampire fleeing from the daylight. Yeah. Because often house rules means I've kind of haphazardly thrown some changes at this game, and I don't really like. I don't like some things, and I've taken them out and replaced them with other stuff, and that's honestly the barrier, the space between hacking and house ruling is very narrow. But I like to think of the difference between the two as house ruling is very one-off oriented, right? Like, I don't like this particular feat, so I'm going to take it out of the game and not replace it with anything. Or I don't like how XP works, so I fiat XP. I just hand out XP however I want at the end of the session.
It seems to work well for very limited in scope, very focused, like surgical strikes almost.
Well, and 9 times out of 10, it's the GM saying, I hate this thing because I am the GM and I get to hate it and I'm taking it out of the game.
Yeah.
But what we're kind of trying to do is create a replicable experience where we're starting from the core level, not just I do or don't like this mechanic. And we've come across lots of mechanics that we do not like very much in Dungeons and Dragons. But what we're trying to do here is create an experience that changes the core idea of the game into something new. That we could say, ultimately what we've done, we can pass on to other people, and they can have a similar experience using the same rule set and kind of repeat what we've done. And hacking, I think, in my mind, is what that's for. It's repurposing an object, in this case a role-playing game, to be something different, and in our case, better, which is to say aligned better with our design goals.
Yep, definitely. Like, that's the critical thing, I think. Like, Adam and I prefer to hate mechanics in context. as opposed to just blindly saying this is bad or this is good. We try to say this is not working for the experience we're trying to create. And we will try our very hardest to restrict ourselves to those kinds of criticisms tonight, but I might stray.
Yeah,
when we get into talking about it,
we talked about this like a tiny bit, and there were some exasperated messages. They were like, "Adam, this game, Adam."
Yep,
So what we're doing here is taking the core concepts from Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and looking at how we can rejigger them, how we can adapt them for the West Marches style of play, which means both the kind of open world sandbox exploration type of play and this sort of creative vision that's starting to come up through the game, the terroir of our role playing oeuvre. Look at me. That's right.
Wow.
The je ne sais quoi of the role playing game. I mean, I think all games kind of have that. All games have this innate conceptual space that they occupy, and aligning the game with that space is what makes the game fun and good, right? So that's what we're here to do today. And in the past, we've looked at modifying specific rules like inspiration. We've looked at changing the reward structure of the game. We've done some sort of general level hacking, and lately we've been focused on specific aspects of play. So in the last episode, Stephen and I were looking at how to incorporate the faction turn from Silent0siris into our game.
I think specifically what we were looking at with that is a way to let the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game of the West Marches do more work in creating a living world that feels interesting to engage with in multiple ways. Like right now, it's kind of, you go out, you run a dungeon, you get some stuff, you come back, you're done. But the experience of the factions in a game like Stars Without Number is very much more complicated. There's a lot more ways you can interact with things. You run out, you do a thing, but that influences something that later comes snowballing back to you somehow. So we were like, I really appreciated that, and currently the D&D game doesn't do anything to help the GM with that, especially not on a systemic level. And now today we're looking at how the game can help us track characters when they're not adventuring, and that's because the West Marches as a game has this concept of a rotating cast group where not every episode or not every session shares the same characters, or even any of the same characters potentially. You can have an entirely new group on a per session basis. But then when a character that has visited the game before comes back, we want to know what's happened to them. We want to know what they've been doing.
Well, I've been thinking a lot about that model and about how, while it's not the way that most like role-playing games are being played right now, I think that, and maybe I mentioned this offhand when we were doing the faction thing, like we're really going back to this sort of proto D&D space, to the sort of Blackmore era, where, and if you are curious about the like roots of D&D and where all this stuff came from, reading Playing at the World is like the best thing you can do. And it talks about this like early D&D stuff, and in there it describes the way that D&D sort of used to be played before it was Dungeons and Dragons, and it was very much rotating cast. The world and the dungeons were the star of the show, right? It was like, who darest enter Castle Greyhawk and brave yon level 4 of dungeon which I invented? Come, brave venturers. And it wasn't like John and Jane and Bob and Sarah get their adventures every session. They're the same characters. They go into the dungeon and they dick around. It was the dungeon at the center of the adventure. The world was what mattered. And the players would just come on some weeks and not on others, right? And they would show up and they would play, and like, oh, congratulations, you were the one who uncovered the throne of Uruk-Kar. Congratulations, like, that's awesome. We will write your name down in the Greyhawk Book of Deeds. And that's way more like the way the West Marches works, right? Where it's like, not so much, like, the characters are there as color, but the things that they do and the way they impact the world are what we're going to remember later down the line, where it's like, specific characters are cool for their personality, but they don't really mean anything until they accomplish something in the game. And sometimes that's uncovering something interesting, sometimes it's killing a cool monster, sometimes it's just dying in a spectacular way or place.
Yep.
And that's very different than what modern Dungeons and Dragons is designed for. So we're recursing D&D in a lot of ways, which I think is kind of really cool.
I like it a lot. I like one of the things that I always have problems with in role-playing games in general, in my real-life groups, is that I have a hard time finding people who can commit 4 hours every week or every 2 weeks or even just any 4-hour segment on a regular time schedule
any 4 hours
to be in my game.
Yeah.
But if I have 8 friends and I'm like, hey guys, I'd like to play some more D&D, who's in this time? Then it can be a lot easier to just get 4 or 5 of them to come over for an evening and just like run a one-shot for whatever reason. And I'd love to find a space for the West Marches to live that supports that kind of play, that people can almost treat it as a board game night. And it's a board game where you have a character that lives and is persistent, and you go back to the game with your character every once in a while. But it feels like something that isn't a concrete, solid commitment that you have to be there for all the time.
Yeah.
That doesn't throw everybody off their game if you're not able to make it. Well, I'd love to see a more relaxed approach to engaging with the system of D&D. And that's also still engaging.
That's so much like kind of what we're aiming for here, and it ties right into the mechanism that we're trying to do now, because everybody always has the question when they return to play, and they can keep track of what everybody else has been up to, right? It's really easy for us to go back and watch episodes and read recaps, look at the wiki. But the answer that we need is, what were you doing while we were adventuring? What were you up to while we were doing that? And I think that that's a question that, because the game Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is predicated on this continued cast, this self-same cast, the problem is that there's no support for you there. Mm-hmm. As far as I know. Okay, so I guess this is the question. Is there anything explicitly in the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide that you know of that says, here's how to handle downtime stuff?
Yes, actually, okay. And it strikes me that I should have brought my books over. Let me run grab them. But there are rules for how much downtime costs. So actually, Adam, if you want to flash the lifestyle cost chart up on the screen while I'm going to get my books. This is the cost, and the lifestyle here are straight from either the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide. So that part of this I'm pulling straight out of the books. I'll be right back.
Okay, cool. So I'll drag Stephen and I back into the shot here. And so what we've got here is Stephen's table from the West Marches. This is the table that we use to indicate your per day cost for your lifestyle. Now, the table that we're looking at here, this per cost, is it in the book tied to a modifier, or is it just the first section, like wretched is 0 a day?
It's just the lifestyle and the cost. There's no D20 modifier.
So is there a mechanic tied to that?
No, there is narrative tied to it. Let me see if I can find if it's in the DMG lifestyle. C, expenses. E, expenses. 157, 158. Oops, blew past it. Yeah, so page 157, the Player's Handbook, lifestyle expenses provide you with a simple way to account for the cost of living in a fantasy world, and then they provide you with the lifestyle expenses. There is some narrative text describing each of these. So for example, wealthy. Choosing a wealthy lifestyle means living a life of luxury, though you might not have achieved the social status associated with the old money of nobility or royalty. You live a lifestyle comparable with that of a highly successful merchant, a favored servant of the royalty, or the owner of a few small businesses. You have respectable lodgings, usually a spacious home in a good part of town, or a comfortable suite at a fine inn. You likely have a small staff of servants. So there's like a little narrative, like you probably have some servants if you're living a wealthy lifestyle. Here's like, for aristocratic, it says, the wealthier you are, the greater the chance you will be drawn into political intrigue as a pawn or participant. So there is some sort of implication that your lifestyle expense affects narratively the way the game responds to you.
Yeah.
In terms of what the Dungeon Master sort of makes available to you. But there are no systemic
it's all hand wavy, right? So it's like, you pay your 10 gold a day, you're an aristocrat. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe you have advantage sometimes.
Yeah, figure it out.
Yeah, figure that shit out. Because, again, I think that Dungeons & Dragons suffers from the idea that it's not the game's place to tell the GM what to do. So just giving narrative guidelines can be enough. And I think that in the right game, you know, you can do that. You can have that work. But it's tough because without mechanisms, it's hard to justify where the bounds of that space is. So that's what, I mean, I assume what the D20 mod was for, to be able to say, this is what you're going to be spending your money on.
Exactly. So, like, there's a couple of other downtime activities that come from the Dungeon Master's Guide, such as building a stronghold, carousing, crafting a magic item, gaining renown, running a business, performing sacred rites, selling magic items, sowing rumors, training to gain levels. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that, like, you can add, but they're, again, sort of, let's see if there's explicitly... Yeah. So they use this language. As the party gains levels, you can add more downtime between adventures to give the characters the time they need to pursue such interests. So, like, I guess the activities themselves are not necessarily presented as explicitly optional, but they're also not explicitly presented as these are the things characters are supposed to do between adventures, give them this much downtime to pursue them, things like that.
And so the reason why we're covering this, just to be clear, is that ideally, in playing a role-playing game that has been like tested and engineered in such a way, the litmus test for is this game working for you is, does it have rules for the things that you feel you need rules for? So if you're just playing D&D as written, that might be enough if you're just hand-waving it. If it's just like, okay, you lived squalidly, describe your squalor in 3 sentences or less, let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's fine. This covers that. But that's not the game that West Marches is. Right. That's not what we're trying to do there.
So, should we talk about the goals that I had for the downtime segment of the West Marches?
Yeah. I mean, like, let's explicitly lay out our design goals here. So,
yeah. So, like, I think there were a bunch of sort of fuzzy goals that all got wrapped into each other. Like, even, you know, the downtime system as I've implemented it in the West Marches is not a well-designed system. But it's also trying to fix something that was not designed to do what I'm trying to do with it. So, first of all, like, it's nice to catch up, to say, okay, we haven't seen Bardrick Bartison in 72 days in game. What's Bardrick been doing? What has she been up to? So to find out what the character's been up to, and also to make that within constraints, right?
So
like,
can we break this one down a little bit? So when you say catch up with the character, why use this instead of just asking the character, like, what have you been doing? It's a legit question. I'm not trying to imply anything. It's
to give a little bit of guidance. Like, not everybody feels really comfortable making up what their character's been up to.
Yeah.
But it's also to explicitly say, when you're not adventuring, your character is living a normal life. So here are the ways in which you can be living a normal life. Tell me about that.
Okay.
So, like, that's the critical limitation there. So, that you're not adventuring during the time that you're not on screen. If you're on screen, you're adventuring. If you're off screen, you're not.
It sounds to me like what we're really doing here is engaging. This is a bit like the inspiration mechanic in that we're using a system in the game to prompt narrative input from the players to help fill that gap and to create a sense of verisimilitude between adventures, so that we can break that D&D-ism of you vanish and reappear when the adventure starts. Right.
And you can actually see that in some of the language that I have included on the downtime chart. So, like, if you roll a natural 1 on a D20 and you were living a modest lifestyle, then you had unforeseen expenses. Times were hard. Tell the group about it. Increase your lifestyle cost by 50%. So it gives a prompt to say, okay, you know, since the last time we saw you, you had a hard time. What was it?
Okay, so the idea, let's focus on the goals, and then I wanna get you to walk me through the current system so we can figure out where it needs improvement and what we like and what we don't like. So the goal of catching up, finding out what the character's been up to, it's about prompting non-adventure related narrative, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and so to get people to do that, the reward is what?
To get people to do...
To get players to engage narratively. Like, right now we have to. We don't have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a specific reward for engaging narratively.
Sure.
But there are rewards that come from the table.
Okay.
So yeah.
So the system, it's triggered automatically when you return to play. You choose the mechanical risk that you're putting your character at, roll, and then narrate the results of that roll. It's kind of like a combat roll, right? Like you choose the opponent you want to attack. You choose how much of your resources you want to expend. Like, are you casting a spell? You're just going to take a swing with your longsword, and then someone describes the results of that happening. Okay.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So economically, there's a design goal here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, there is not a lot for players to spend their money on at all. As players level up, they gain exponentially increasing amounts of gold, and there's not really anything for them to spend it on beyond like level 5 when they've purchased the nicest armor, the nicest weapons, and the nicest horses.
Like this is a conversation that you and I have had before, and I've had with lots of people about the economy of Dungeons and Dragons, and like it's a finicky thing because the gold is a reward, right, for engaging in the risky behavior of role playing. You know, your character might die, and if your character doesn't die, you might get rich, and then you have the gold. But what do you do with that reward once you've got it? And I think that most role-playing games fall flat on that. Yep. Like AD&D, once you get to 9th level, you can build a fort, and it doesn't really like give you specific means to do that. Some games, like Adventurer Conqueror King, does have tiers where it's like, this is how much a wall costs per 10 feet. And so there's some of that Rampart-style fortress building in it. But D&D as it is, the only things that you can spend money on very quickly become paltry, like totally paltry expenses after a certain point, and you can't buy magic items.
Yep, that's an explicit design feature of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, is that magic items are not in the economy. They're not something your characters can buy. Interestingly, you can craft them, which to a certain extent is buying them, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
But it's kind of presented as you're going to need to collect the resources to do it. You're going to need to unlock access to like various, forges and arcane sort of whatever. There's narrative work that needs to go into your creation of these magical items. And it's interesting that explicitly in the Dungeon Master's Guide, players gain massive amounts of gold. Like if you scroll up just a little bit, Adam, you're looking at it already. There are treasure hoards, HOARD, not HORD.
Treasure hoards.
Yeah, treasure hoards. There are treasure hoards for levels 0 through 4, levels 5 through 10, levels 11 through 16, and levels 17 plus. These are the challenge rating of the encounter. In a given campaign, the Dungeon Master Guide says, so at first it says you can hand out as much or as little treasure as you want, which to me is a huge red flag already. Like, if treasure is a reward at all, you don't want to be able to hand out as much or as little as you want because you want it to be important. Players don't care about things that aren't important, and even though it feels nice for the first couple levels to be like, I earned 300 GP worth in gems. Like, that's great.
This would literally be like if in Pac-Man there was RNG for every dot you ate, and the dots could give you between 0 and 1 billion points.
Yep.
What would be the point of a top score, right?
Yep.
It's like, well, I ate 3 dots, and now I have 6 billion points or whatever.
Yep.
It doesn't make any sense. So there do have to be guidelines for this, and they try to, like, again, it's that whole let's not tell the GM what to do thing, but give them advice.
Right. So, like, there's an important thing that I need to say, which I probably should start every Hack Attack stream with. I believe that for my money, the best games in general that I find the coolest, the most interesting are the games that have rule sets that force unique player experiences to come out of them. So when I played Dwarf Fortress, and it's an entirely simulated game, and there's no story that's being told to me, but because of the simulation and the way I interact with it, a completely unique thing happens that I can tell my friends. That's great. What I would love to get out of the West Marches is there's a complex, or not necessarily complex, but there's a well-tuned interlocking series of systems that support a simulationist look at adventuring life in a, historical fantasy world.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Totally.
So I want the game to say, yeah, here's how you have to live if you're going to survive in this world. And then also, if you attain certain levels of wealth, here's what you can buy with it. So just to go over this treasure
let's
hoard
look at this
table,
because I got some questions, Steven, about some treasure I'm owed.
Yeah, I bet you do. So from levels 0 through 4, players are supposed to come across, or in an average campaign from 1 to 20, players are supposed to come across 7 hordes of CR 0 through 4. The average amount of gold per horde is 375, and a 4-way split of a single horde is 93 gold. The average gold per party member over the course of a campaign is 657 from levels 0 through 4 treasure hordes. I don't think we're terribly far off from that, actually. We might be a little bit low.
I have 300. No, I have 250, I think, right now, and I spent 150 on the potion maker's house.
Yeah.
So
you had 400 out of 650,
close, yeah,
and you spent some of that on Downtime.
If I get another 250 before I get to 4, then I'll be about on par with this.
I mean, especially given the speed at which levels 1, 2, and 3 pass, I think many of those hordes come in the level 3 to 4 jump.
Well, the other thing, too, though, is that, I don't think my experience in the West Marches is necessarily indicative of everyone's, because I'm trying really hard to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, you are going for treasure.
Yeah.
And then levels 5 through 10, you're supposed to get 18 treasure hordes at 5 through 10, totaling average gold per party member 20,590 and 87 copper.
All I gotta do is get to level 10. I'm gonna be so fucking rich.
Yep. At 11 through 16, 12 hordes totaling 109,000 gold. At 17 plus, 8 hordes totaling 672,000 gold. Plus magic items. This is just pure money and gems and art objects.
Sure.
And then that's this is all cumulative, right? That 600 doesn't disappear when you hit level 5. That 20,000 doesn't disappear when you hit level 11. That 100,000 doesn't disappear when you hit level 17. So that's a massive amount of gold that you can spend on nothing.
There's functionally, and this is a problem with every economy-based role-playing game I've pretty much ever played, where it's you're rewarded with money, and you spend that money to be better at getting money. We're not dying the next time you get money. But eventually the thing plateaus out where you have so much money that you're not spending it. Like in Shadowrun, you've already bought all the spells and cyberware you can ever possibly afford, and you have so much left over. The only recourse is to quit Shadowrunning, right? And in this case, to be because we've talked about this before, there's no escape from Dungeons & Dragons. There's no buyout. There's no I invest my 600 gold and quit adventuring because fuck this. Which I think runs directly counter to lifestyle, because Grigori has enough money now to not adventure for almost a year and never have to do anything. I could live modestly for a year. So what's going to happen by the time I'm level 11 and I could live 109,000 days modestly? You've hit the jackpot, right? And so for me, it's this question about finding a way, and you mentioned it in your design goals, to give players something to spend money on, but how can you make that feel real and beneficial in a way that doesn't feel punitive and forced?
Right,
because
exactly.
Punitive money spending in a role-playing game can feel so frustrating when gold is such a significant part of the reward structure. You know that 200 gold that you have, especially if your amount of downtime is related since the last time you played. If let's say in my first adventure I got 200 gold, and then I don't get to play for 2 months in game time, and I'm so excited, I'm yep, I'm going to spend that 200 gold, I'm going to level up, I'm going to get back in the West Marches, and it's fuck, all of my money is gone,
Give it to me.
Yeah, or I have to live wretchedly, which is just going to put me in a worse position, and so
there's an interesting thing that's happened, which is I think that the players right now, they don't realize how easy it is to earn their cost of living through just labor. You're not supposed to lose gold from your lifestyle. It's supposed to be if you rolled poorly, then you might have lost some gold.
So there's a secondary table, right? There's the whole, I don't know if you included it here. Yeah, no, there isn't. So
no, I didn't.
There's a secondary thing where you choose what you did during your downtime, and you could earn back some of that gold depending on how well you roll on a related test, which makes sense.
So it's kind of like, tell us what you did, and then I say, okay, roll against your stat or your skill depending on what you were using to make your living, and then you can finance your lifestyle up to, like, if you roll really well, you're paying for your standard cost of living up to rich, which is a 4 gold piece per day sort of lifestyle. Of course, if you're rolling poorly, then you're only earning a squalid lifestyle for that period of time, right?
So I wonder, I guess, in this case, about whether or not this runs counter to our original design conversation about what is the West Marches. Because if I'm an adventurer because I'm called to some higher purpose or different purpose, I'm too weird to be a farmer, why is it that after level 4 I could just quit and be a farmer?
Yep.
Right? Especially in a world where we want the characters to get weirder and weirder and less normal as the campaign goes on, right? By the time you're level 17, you are a pretty fucked up individual, right? Like
you're kind of some sort of pseudo demigod that has been poisoned and afflicted by the world, and maybe like you change the environment when you walk around.
Right. And you're not a person for whom downtime should apply anymore. And so, the system, I think that it's interesting because there's a lot of design crossfiring happening here. And I think that there's lots of room to take this in different directions. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what what other games do in this space, because downtime is not our sole burden to bear. There are other games that have done this. So
there was one last downtime goal.
Okay.
Which was to simulate narrative references. If you read a book like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, like that series of tales, like they always go on fantastic adventures, they find fantastic loot, and then the next story they are piss poor again because they have terrible financial responsibility. Mm-hmm. And they spend all of their money surviving and, throwing lavish parties for themselves or whatever, right? So, there's an element of an attempt to recreate what you read in fiction in these rules.
Yeah, I put in there's thematic verisimilitude. Because it happens in the core stuff, we want to replicate it in the game. We've talked about on this show and on Being Everything Else about how to create a game experience that feels like something else. And that's part of this, is that the rules need to support the type of play that you're experiencing at the table. I'm not even going to begin to take you to task over your use of fun and story in that last point, but I understand what you mean, that you want to give the players
unique narrative triggers.
Yeah, which is actually way more. A trigger is way more like responsive in that way because it's a kick in the butt to the player to be like, well, what happened when you had this bad thing occur to you or whatever. Mm-hmm. So these are goals, if not all of them at once, that I've seen kind of resolved in other games in different ways. And the two that I thought of, when we first started talking about this, are a game called Transylvanian Adventures. And a game called Torchbearer. And they both do this I think Transylvanian Adventures handles this in a very similar way to the way West Marches does, in that it's quite random. And I think that Torchbearer handles it in a way that we can look at for inspiration in terms of community building and adding assets to a location to be able to take advantage of.
Cool.
So in Transylvanian Adventures, you determine, first of all, how much time between adventures that you're going on, which is kind of what we're doing here. And this determines how much downtime there is. So the higher level you are, the more time there is between your adventures, because your adventures are a bigger deal. This is a part of the narrative structure of Transylvanian Adventures. It's built in by design that the game takes quite a long time. So it may not necessarily be a thing we would want to steal, but once you're done that, you can choose what table you want to roll on. So he has several tables in this game. And if you have no money, you roll on. If you have no money to spend, you can't invest. You roll on the very bad things table.
Nice.
So just something bad happens to you. This represents the characters slowly losing their mind over time. Where I might have been on this last adventure where we were hunting down a vampire, and I just can't get the vampire's haunting gaze out of my head, and as a result I cannot sleep. My dreams are filled with horrifying visions, and it affects my roll on whatever table I choose. It also reduces my maximum hit points for the next adventure. So the idea for this one is that, and this is true for negative and positive, the design goal here is whatever happens between adventures carries on for just the next adventure and then fades. So if you do really well, maybe you get a bonus to one of your stats, or you have advantage on every single saving throw of a particular kind, but only for the next adventure, right? Because you were inspired in this way. So if you don't have money, roll in the very bad things table. Otherwise, your character, it talks about whether you have relationships. So if you have true love, it can give you a bonus on certain tables. If you have children, they can give you a bonus on certain tables. If you're married, but they can also affect you negatively. You have to pay more if you have kids and a spouse, right? Your family ties and your assets help you.
Yeah.
If you own a home or an estate, you can have a place to stay. The bigger it is, the more people you can have stay there. But if you also have family, your husband and your kids don't like it when you invite your adventurer friends to stay at the house for 6 weeks, right? So this is a way to tie in your wealth level is the thing you buy as a character. And the higher it is, the more assets you can have. So you might buy a stable, you might buy a library, you might buy a lab, and they give you a bonus to things between adventures. And then you choose, do you want to do magical research? Do you want to attend to mundane matters? Or do you want to eat gruel? And if you're eating gruel, that means you're just working and doing nothing but working. So, you know, you get a job, and this is the like, do your job, get enough money to survive, and move on kind of table. And then lastly, there's the party like it's 1899 table, where you spend as much money as you want, you throw a huge party, and then random stuff happens. Like maybe you win a beauty contest, or you get drunk and lose a bag of money, depending on how well you roll. So the idea here is it's very much like what we're already doing, but it's broken down into character types, because often wizard type characters will spend time and money researching magic, right? And this could reveal a secret about an enemy that has been plaguing the area. It might drum up helpful things. If you attend to mundane matters, you start a family, or you invest in the market, or you whatever. So you have all these different things that you can do depending on what kind of character advancement you want to do between sessions. And in a way, this system adds on an entirely new advancement model for characters, where yes, you're advancing as a character, but you're also advancing as a member of society, or as a magical researcher, or advancing in the eyes of your god by doing goodly works.
Or not so goodly.
Yeah, or not so goodly, exactly. And so there is that element of choice where you pick the thing that you want to do, but there's also the element of randomness where, yes, just because you chose to do magical research, there's still a pretty good chance that you're going to have to roll on the magical research mishaps table, right? But if you're lucky, you might earn some XP. You might research a new spell you didn't have before. The highest option on the magical research table is you add a new spell to your spell book. They ignore the rules. They say, I don't care if your max number of spells is this. You rolled great. You have become elected. You've been elected Grand Master of your secretive group of magically minded individuals, and you can gain some new spells or whatever. One thing that this does that we don't really have the freedom to do necessarily in D&D is XP rewards for doing nothing on screen.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can 4 XP in Transylvania Adventures is a significant jump towards your next level.
Nice.
So it's again, and this is the thing, you don't get money out of this. You invest money in and get mechanical benefits back. And so I think that's one thing we can take away from this, is that it is a money sink and doesn't output money in the way that Lifestyle does. But you can buy off you can spend 100 gold to go from working class to lower middle class, and all that does is it buys you another asset. So this again builds kind of into the idea of having a town or whatever.
Yeah.
When we played this campaign, we did a full campaign of it, so to start to finish. I think everybody ended up at like level 6 or 7, which for this game is quite far. And one of the characters ended up having 3 kids, because every time they came home, they attended to mundane matters, sunk a bunch of money into it, and by the end of the game, it started in 1899, it ended in 1914, I think. Yeah, they had they had 2 sons and a daughter by the end of the campaign. And those were NPCs that I could bring into the game between sessions and incorporate into the world. So it helped kind of build that out.
Nice.
So, I mean, again, like, this is a system in which the problem is solved by giving players a money sink and then changing the way that you play your character just for your next adventure until you roll on this table again. So it's always keeping people a little bit on your toes. And I think that it helps you decide what adventure you want to go on, because if everybody does really well and we've all got, you know, an extra hit die this adventure, well, fuck it, let's go take on a tougher challenge because we're all a little bit bolstered.
Yeah.
You know, so that's one system in which, you know, this kind of thing is sort of handled. And then the other is Torchbearer, and Torchbearer explicitly has a phase called the town phase, where the characters are, depending on where they are, they're making use of places within a specific location. So I would have, as the GM, I'd have a list of towns, right? So I'd say Virascali has these things, and I don't know, these other smaller towns have lesser versions of them, or they have less things. But there's also like empty lots in Virascali, so you can fill them with these things. So, you know, town locations are basically allowances for the players to choose what they do with their downtime. So you come home in Torchbearer from an adventure, and you decide, where are you staying? Are you staying at the inn? Are you staying at a flophouse, a hotel? Are you staying at your home? Did you buy a home? Are you staying there? Are you hiding out somewhere? Or are you lying in the street? And if you lie in the street, you can't recover from any of your conditions. If you're sick, you stay sick. You can't level up. You can't do shit because you're poor. So someone else has to like let you live in their house, but that strains both of you. And then after that, you can use each area in the city. You can visit the market. You can pray at the shrine. You can go get a job at the guild hall to help offset your costs. You can spend your loot at the market. All of those things are allowances built on what the town has available to you. So you build up your debt, and then at the end you make a resources roll and you pay that debt off if you can afford it. If not, then you might get run out of town, or you might have a huge penalty next time you come back, or you might be banned from the market for the next 6 months, right? So the game has specific things that can happen to you if you shirk your responsibilities in town. And the thing that I like about Torchbearer in particular, in how it might work with the West Marches, is that we're seeing a little bit of this already. Buy a potion is an option that becomes available to us.
Yeah.
And, you know, you and I were talking about before when I said, you know, what's the point of buying a house in Virascali, right? If I spend 500 gold and I buy a house, I'm paying house upkeep, I'm still paying my horse upkeep, I still have to level up, and I still am rolling the same crap on the same tables, so buying a house mechanically does nothing.
Yeah.
But in this case, it would allow me to maybe get a bonus on those rolls, maybe alleviate having to roll on certain things.
Temporary hit points for the next adventure.
Exactly. Because
Yep.
I'm better off because I sunk that time and money in. And I love the idea. This is the XCOM minigame, right? Where I'm like, okay, cool. So we're all going to decide that in the future we want to go after some big scary monster. So to get that monster, we're going to need to build a library in town so all the magically inclined characters can research it. We're going to need to build a house or houses big enough to hold everyone who plans on going on that adventure. We're going to need to build a blacksmith and hire a dwarf to work that blacksmith so that we can get access to +1 weapons for everybody who doesn't already have magic, and then we're going to go on that goddamn adventure.
Yep.
So it's a way to sink money into an ongoing continuance in the world. It's
I think
flow
I think
of that.
there could be something really cool with the West Marches specifically, where you don't know what's out there. So somehow, like, you do research into figuring out what kind of things are out there. You find out something about what's out there, but not everything, but it still gives you a hint. And then you expend your resources sort of trying to solve the thing that you found out about. So, like, you know, you find out that the reason that there's more plant activity in the Starkwald is because there's a flame spirit that's pushing plants from the center of it. Okay, the flame spirit is, you know, vulnerable to frost or ice damage or whatever. So, you know, we build up the blacksmith to where he can apply ice damage to our weapons. We all buy ice damage on our weapons. We go out, we kill the flame spirit, and then it feels really great.
Yeah, and I think the thing here too is that, like, it ties back into that whole idea of the overarching kind of design goals that we had about that exploration thing, and that you don't always have to leave town to explore the world. You can have exploration come to you by way of traveling sages or whatever, and you can attract them to your town with the money that you've got from adventuring.
Yeah.
And so I think that you know, between the two systems, there's some some space that we could look at in terms of random events that occur versus the time. Like, I think we're looking at two separate systems. We're looking at what happened to Virascali and what happened to you in Virascali.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some money transfer into both of those design spaces.
Yeah, totally.
So, I mean, I guess the thing to look at now would be, like, what modifications can we apply to what we already have to get it closer to that, or do we need to start looking at the idea of sort of scrapping the whole thing and moving up from there?
Well, as much as I hate to say it, I think that now that we have a clearer view of the design goals of this thing, I think that we can build a much better system from the ground up rather than trying to wrest the thing that we've got now into fitting something. Because what I did in the first place, like it muddied a bunch of things together and it didn't do any of them terribly well. And I think just splitting that out and saying, okay, no, first we're trying to find out these things, and then we're trying to fix those things, and then we're trying to fix these other things will help us build a much, much better thing. I've already been thinking about, like, for example, if the cost of living is just completely 100% abstracted, we don't really need to know, exactly what you did. We don't need to track your money over that course of time. Whatever you did, it was enough to survive for that period of time, and we don't need to track coin for it. Yeah. Then we can do something that's much more like, okay, now, if you would like, you can spend some money to roll on these tables and have special things happen to you as a result. So, like, you throw a party, like you said, or, you spend some time researching, or, any number of possible other things that make sense from a fictional perspective of spending money. Like, I had a couple ideas where I was like, okay, you could spend some money to roll on the table that lets you go be a thief. But wait, why would you spend money to go be a thief?
Yeah. Spend money on being... Well, the problem is that, again, we come back to the reward structure of Dungeons & Dragons, which is you get rewarded for killing shit or evading it in such a way that you might as well have killed it, avoiding or dealing with combat encounters, and you level up based on that. So short-circuiting that system can be really tricky at the design level.
Yeah. Because
the rewards have to be tertiary to that. Because they can't even be secondary rewards. You can't even be like, you get gold. It has the economy has to flow the way that the game has designed it. Otherwise, we have to restructure the whole economy.
Yeah.
Which is a much bigger goal. And what we're kind of focusing on now is make the game playable as is so we can keep the momentum up and not have to be like, sorry, West Marches, we're putting it on hold for 6 months. We want to kind of adjust the game towards a place where we can play it in a way that helps us answer some questions about the larger design.
Yeah. So someone in chat asked, didn't you want them to have a money sink for them to continue to go adventuring? Yes, but I don't think that, like, after further examination, I don't think that lifestyle is the right place for that money sink. Because, like Adam says, it doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like a punishment.
It's totally punitive, and it's like the reward... This is the thing, like, no one on the show at any point seriously, like, I might ask facetiously or to interrogate a design point, but nobody is going to seriously ask, well, why am I adventuring? I quit. I'm going to go become a farmer. Can we do an hour of me doing farming stuff? Because the premise of the game, we invite people onto the show to be like, this is what it's about. We're going to go on an adventure. You want to go on an adventure? Boom, make a character. Let's go adventuring. And that's what the game is about at its core level and what the whole design flows towards. So making that money sink to replace the idea that, I mean, the game has a problem where we have too much money. And we need to rebalance that. And like you said, it's punitive money sink is not a good way to do that necessarily.
Right. Like, I'd much rather have it be like, okay, you can spend money in order to gain a chance to get, your level times 5 temporary hit points for the next adventure or something like that.
Well, I mean, here's the analogy, right? People hate spending money on taxes.
Yes.
But they like that there are police who will stop people from taking the iPhones they bought away from them, and people fucking love buying iPhones, right?
Yep.
So we want to give the players an opportunity to buy iPhones, not to pay their taxes.
Yes, that's the thing, right? Like even like a repair mechanic has a money sink for magical items or something like that.
Fun tax.
It's essentially a penalty. We want to find a reward. We want to find something where, like, at a certain point, and oh god, like, this is such a huge problem. because it starts getting to the very core of the game. What we want to do is we want to design a game where as players get more money and more power, players end up underpowered for the adventures that they should be undertaking.
Yeah.
And the way that they meet the power level is by spending money. And then it feels good because it's like, okay, like I know we're going to have a really tough time with that white down in the barrows, but oh man, you know, if I buy the sun oil, then I can go kill the white easily. And, you know, all it costs me is 200 gold, and then I've killed a white, and I've probably gotten a little bit more, and like that sync still applies, but it feels like a reward because it's something the player opted into instead of something the player needed to get.
And that's right. And it's like we want to create the World of Warcraft economy situation where you're excited about going on a quest that rewards you with something you can use to take on a quest you've wanted to take on since the beginning, right? Where you're like, you don't just get to jump into Blackwing Lair, you got to work your way up there. You got to get that shitty gear first, and it feels like if it's designed properly, I'm not saying WoW does this perfectly, but the idea is there is some benefit in I'm going out to do a quest so that I can have a better chance at doing a quest later down the line. And D&D, as it's built, does that already by giving you magic items and gaining you experience, but the money doesn't plug into that. And what we're doing here is creating an outside system that allows us to push back into that that reward structure by saying, take that money you've spent, sink it into the town, gain benefits that will continue to help you, in addition to your experience and magic items, to go and take on quests you couldn't do otherwise. And like you said, Stephen, if the economy is such that XP and magic items alone will never put you in a position to be adequately leveled, this would be the third thing that you have to invest in. And I think that ultimately we all see Virascali as our communal property, where we're like, if I sink money into this thing, we will all benefit, and that is cool, because then you have an impact on the sessions that you're not in.
Yeah, that's like that whole sort of recollection. I'm almost sort of wondering if there should be something more built into the game about like when a group clears a dungeon, or when a group kills things, or when a group does something big, like that somehow becomes enshrined permanently in a way that's obvious when players visit that thing again.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, the way you guys buried Maggie's character in the tomb that you found recently, or that wasn't you, I guess, but that was another.
I wasn't there. I was surprised we didn't like stumble across her body.
Yeah.
Chat was like, "What about Maggie's bones?"
Yeah, they buried her, which is how she wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly. They did a good job and not a shitty job.
Right, but like to be able to call that out more specifically, and so that like later players see the actions of earlier players in a very clear, like, cause-effect way. And then also, later players see the impacts of earlier non-players, if that makes sense. Like, what people have done in the downtime, what people have invested into the town.
It bleeds the whole thing right into that idea of persistent universe, continued narrative, and the idea that what we do on screen matters on screen, and what we have done sticks around when we leave, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that potion shop exists, and the fact that Kellen has been like engaged with that NPC, I'm interested in, even though I'm not really there, because me and Kurthak helped pay for that thing, right? And and it exists in that state specifically because we invested the money.
When we come back from a break, which we should probably take now,
we probably should. You're right.
I should tell you more about the idea of being able to forge certain properties onto items and what that might cost.
Well, and I think that's the kind of thing we should talk about. We're going to talk about the game part of this and be like, because I think we can get pretty gamey with the idea of like, if you buy this building, these are the mechanical benefits it might provide. This is how you can upgrade it, and then we just slap an economy on that, and good to go. So
totally,
we can hammer that out in an hour, right?
Yeah, absolutely, easy. Game design is easy.
We'll give it a shot. So let's take a quick break. We will come right back and continue hacking away at D&D.
Waka!
See you soon, everybody.